Hello and welcome to another episode of Darkness in Dublin. And as we lay our scene, two Hermetics are meeting in the Hermetic Chantry located in Trinity College to talk about clearly serious and weighty Hermetic matters. I'm going to suggest we skip the boring, pointless 5 minutes of small talk and start in media res. So, Theodos, it's been how many weeks has it been since we last met? 3, 4? Lost track of time, frankly, with everything that's been afoot.
Fairly significant period of time, I believe, yes.
So how have you been get on under Magister D'Onofri? Smiles.
Fairly well. I've learned my first spell, hopefully one of many.
No. I remember the days. She's a very good master, but at the same time, she's also very busy. Magister Crocial runs the Chantry and represents the tradition on the council in the city, but he's a bit. I think he's busy with his own research a lot. So Magister D'Onofri does a lot of the day-to-day work. So if you don't see her around, don't think badly of her. That's simply why.
Oh yes, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting our lead yet, but I suppose as the bottom of a totem pole, that is only to be expected. I'm sure it will come in time. As for D'Onofrio, she's been remarkably pleasant to me.
Yes, she has.
She was actually the one who discovered me initially after my awakening.
Oh, you went through that kind of awakening. My own background was a little different. So I was taken in by the order very young, and they raised me and they guided me through the process. So for me, it was more of a slow, steady process, not a sudden awakening.
Interesting. I didn't know such a thing was possible. To my knowledge, all what I've been informed so far is that awakenings were spontaneous. So this is quite the new discovery for me.
How can I put this? I mean, there are complicated debates of whether anyone or everyone can awaken, and yes, many people awaken spontaneously, and that's normal in the other traditions. We Hermetics, we find that we recruit the right people, the best people, some would say, and we'll train them and guide them and initiate in the mysteries. And some of them will only go so far. Some of them will stay in the lower degrees. Some of them may master hedge magic, but not fully awaken. Some of them will get through the process, but at least they've been properly prepared and trained for it. So, but still. So, I mean, would you like to tell me a little more about yourself? So, how long ago did you awaken?
Oh, it's been let's see, it's been around a month and a half now, so it's been a fair period of time. I was just studying my PhD at Trinity College.
Oh, what do you read?
Oh, I've been studying. 1 second, let's actually look it up because I think it's actually recorded on a sheet. Yes, I was I'm studying classical and ancient history.
Oh,
linguistics in particular.
Oh, well, again, a traditional coup de grade for the order. Language. What languages do you speak?
Let's see. Well, of course, I'm speaking right now, so not including my first language: French, Irish, Italian, German, Mandarin, Arabic, Spanish, Breton, modern Breton, modern Egyptian, Sanskrit, and I can speak and understand Sumerian and the original Latin language, not classical or ecclesiastical.
That's quite an impressive range. Um, I,
It has been something of my life work and endeavor, and
Dude, you've obviously,
given the limited employment opportunities within the areas of which I work, I considered it something of a necessity.
mm,
Unfortunate, but I suppose it brought out the best of me in the end.
mm. No, yes, I suppose. Join the order there may well be the sensible career option for you with that background.
If nothing else, I have a bright future as an interpreter.
Yes, especially with the more modern languages. Um, for my part, as part of my training, I've learnt Hermetic Latin. Um, my, I mean, you probably know this better than me. My understanding is it's not really a different language to the classical Latin, more of a different regional dialect.
Yes, there's around, you have the three main categories of Latin: classical, ecclesiastical, and Vulgar. Ecclesiastical is actually still in use. It is not a dead language.
Oh,
But
speaking as a Catholic,
I
I certainly understand that.
and then there is a base or ancestral or original Latin, the sort of origin point for the other three languages.
Yes,
Um,
and of course, as I say, Hermetic Latin. Um, it tends to be a little closer to the classical Latin than the Church Latin is, because we have people that
I
keep
can imagine.
traditions. Um, um, I
Well, no, it's only more reason for me to get up to speed.
mm. And of course, there is one other language which you may well want to consider now with your knack for learning them. Enochian.
Enochian. That is interesting. I've never heard of that before.
If you were to look it up in the books of the sleepers, they would say it was a made up language, the language of angels, discovered by Doctor John Dee, the court physician to Queen Elizabeth. The truth in the order is it is the language of spirits, then the native language of all spirits, and that yes, Doctor Magister John Dee of House Monosagus did release it into the mundane world. Certain other traditions, some have some knowledge of it. It's a lot more common in the order and a lot more accessible if you wish to learn it. Some traditions don't like it because they say it's a language of command, not a language of discourse.
Understandable. I could see why it would be considered aggressive in that case, but does the language dictate to spirits, or is it merely a means of communicating?
It can certainly be used as a medium of communication. That said, it's a it's a directive language in the sense of you could not go about your day to day business and function purely knocking, even if people understood you. You can't walk down the local market and buy two bags of apples with it very easily. It's the language of spirits, not a language of people.
An interesting challenge, then. I can only imagine its structure is vastly different from any mortal language.
Um, yes, I've been brushing up on it in the last month myself. So, but yeah, you may, if you're around here long enough, you may occasionally hear angels or demons and such like using it. Um, some would say it's the first language. since it may predate mankind itself.
Interesting.
Still, oh, you awakened, as you say, a month and a half ago, and you were fortunate that the author found you and was taking you in, and sounds like it's working out well so far. Do you want to talk about your awakening? What happened, or would you prefer us to move on from that story?
Oh, of course. I don't consider it off limits at all. I'd be more than happy to. In fact, maybe you could shed some light. My avatar appeared to me in a form very different from what I was expecting. But yes, I was simply initially just simply walking down the hallway to the library of this very college. When I began to have, well, at the time I believed I was hallucinating, witnessing, well, seeing myself within a lightly forested area, a very old, I can only call it a hut in front of me. Then there was a woman working out of it. These were very intermittent for the past half minute or so, until I began to reach the library, and then I found myself fully flung back into what would appear to be the distant past, although I can't determine when. Maybe, presumably, from the Antiquity to Dark Ages period, as the gentleman that came out of the building brandished an axe and threw it at me, at which point my avatar communicated with me and asked if I would wish to be extricated from the situation, after expressing some degree of panic that I was about to be killed through the most spontaneous situation that I'd ever gone through in my life.
Okay, just a moment. When you say someone threw an axe at you, would this be a Scandinavian?
I cannot pinpoint. I believe it to be, if I recall, the language that the woman and the man were speaking in would appear to be some sort of very ancient Irish. I was able to pick up cues simply because I know the modern language, but it was very far gone. I couldn't understand what they were actually saying. Only what the language was itself.
The reason I ask is Dublin was founded as a Viking colony. You may know.
Likely, then. Likely.
It may have been before that, but go on.
I might do some research into it myself, but as you say, it's very likely. At which point I was, for lack of a better term, teleported, again spontaneously. The location just snapped back to another. A very Baroque-looking private room. Very, very, very noble. Very, in a way, almost. I wouldn't call it Victorian, but very ostentatious. Which, and I witnessed a woman who appeared fairly aged, blind, her eyes were milky white, very long, patchy robe with a hood over it, playing with something, had a crystal ball with her.
Mm-hmm.
Very much, almost reminiscent of a fortune teller in many ways, a stereotypical fortune teller. We had a short discussion. over what had just happened, and that my eyes had been opened. I asked what my eyes had exactly been opened to, as clearly something had happened, but the situation wasn't exactly clear to me at the time. She did offer me a seat. I was quite grateful. And that we would see each other again, and then offered me a chance to view some of these impossibilities. At which point, I decided or proposed whether it would be appropriate for us to test this hypothesis of a small trip back through time, then, to see if we could replicate what had just happened. I chose the Senate of Rome in AD 23, if I recall.
AD or BC?
AD.
Mm.
So post, yeah.
Yeah, so that would be reign of Augustus.
Yes. It was a fairly average day in the halls of the Roman Senate, but it was an absolutely exhilarating watch. Obviously, as a historian, being able to see events occur firsthand, I was able to. Well, I mean, I consider it something any historian would dream of.
Right.
After all, we seek to reconstruct the past with what little evidence remains, and I was instead of being given evidence, I was given everything.
And you were able to see. Could they see you?
No, I wasn't sure if I was simply looking for it or if I was there and I was simply unknown to them. As when I initially, at the beginning of my awakening, I, of course, was spotted by the very broad, well-toned gentleman who threw an axe at me. So they were definitely aware of my presence, which leads me to believe that I likely was in the past at that point in at that point in time. Forgive me for the
many people.
light joke.
Many people experience extreme magical events when they awaken, beyond their ability to ever replicate. So that may have been what happened then. I'm aware that there are mages within and without the order able to view the past and the future. To travel into the past is, I'm not going to say it is impossible, but it is a tremendous feat. And to travel that far back is may as well be impossible. I would think what you said, that you are simply viewing the past. What also impresses me though is you were viewing the past as a location you were not. You may not have understand the complexity here. You were not just looking across time; you were looking across space as well, which makes it an even more impressive, remarkable feat.
Interesting. I was not aware of that. Well, I have been made aware of the correspondence sphere and its relation to time, or its relation to space, but
what you described sounds like would require both correspondence and time, to look across space and time. I mean, it may have been that the person who saw you were themselves aware of the nature of time. I gather it is possible for people can sense if those from their future are spying on them. Time is complicated and not my area, to be honest with you.
It is perhaps something I should look into further. Then I found that my talents lie with what most hermetics seem to be talented in, harnessing raw elemental energies. Although I have some basic knowledge of time. and space.
That is useful. Yes, I mean, certainly many houses have a talent for what the people mainly like to call forces or the elements. Um, but then the order is made up, as you know, of many houses now, and the houses are all traditions in their own right with their own specialisms. Um, have you thought about which house you would seek to join?
It's not something I've looked into a great deal yet. As an apprentice and someone who's barely learned his first significant ability, it's not something I've paid too much mind to right now. That and the affair seems somewhat political, which honestly isn't my interest or forte.
Um, the order is made up of people, and people are political. But at the same time, the houses are traditions, and you need to find the tradition that right for you. Um, in times past, the houses were literal lineages of master to pupil. One took on the house of one's mentor because you've been brought up with that tradition. Much as you probably know as a student, once you spent so many years in a university, it somehow becomes part of you in it and its rituals and traditions. Um, there is, there are houses I think who have more of an association with time magic. That might be of if you have the chance to meet with their members, that might be the one you should take. D'Onofrio, if you will have met, is House Flambeau, which is the same house I have taken.
Oh, pardon?
D'Onofrio, Magister D'Onofrio, mentor. She is of House Flambeau, traditionally the warriors or knights of the order. Just pondering about which house. Just think about to ponder which house would be most fitted to a time. Yes, House Shay. Has this been discussed with you already?
No. Would you mind explaining to me House Shay? I'm largely unaware of the vast majority of the houses. It's knowledge I haven't really inquired into or has been taught to me as of yet. Only that they exist.
Of course. Their magical tradition goes back to Egypt, which sounds like you've already got some familiarity with. Can't say I've met many of them. I don't see many of them around here. They were part of the order for a very small part of House Expeditionary for a while. They became a full house back in the 80s. So they are now a fully respected house.
In the 1980s?
Yes. That's when they
Recent
formally became recognised as a major house of the order. I know they practice. I know, well, all hermetics work with names, but they're particularly associated with the manipulation of the power of names and distilling creation down into the secret of names. And let's see, I think they do tend to have tradition have a female leadership. Okay, I can't say I've had any dealings with them myself firsthand. Based in apparently Cairo and Harvard. But yes, their speciality sphere is time magic. So,
house.
but still, You have, pardon the pun, plenty of time.
This is true. Hopefully. I certainly hope it doesn't cut short anytime soon. So it was the last house you mentioned, House Shay and House.
House. Oh, think a moment. Well, that's the one that's most associated with time.
House Shay?
Yes.
Okay, I must have misheard you then.
A-E-A.
Interesting, thank you. I'll definitely look into that.
So, I know last time we met, we were at the, well, some would say trial, of Yuki. I don't know how much of that you were able to follow.
I have a transcript.
I more meant knowing the background context.
Yes. Well, from what I'm aware, Miss Yuki made a deal with some sort of infernal entity that entitled it to have naming rights to her first child.
That's correct. The entity went by the username of Faust, as in the famous infernalist.
Yes. Why would anyone make a deal with Faust after the apocryphal tale? I have no idea.
Well, quite.
I believe that was the entire point of the story.
She wasn't the first person in the city to do it, I gather.
Faust, there are a great many people in the world, I suppose.
Faust was a demon of some rank and power. He was playing very great games. He's now been dealt with for the moment. So we don't have to worry about him for now. Yes, and some of us were rather perturbed the way that Yuki was openly admitting to having done this, and that people were just casually ignoring the matter. The tolerance of the city for that sort of thing was quite shocking. I mean, for my part, I would have preferred that we had a proper, fair, and open trial, if only because it might bring to light all the other things that various other people have been doing.
This is true. I take it that infernalism is very much frowned upon, given what I've witnessed.
But it's frowned upon in pretty much every tradition. It's even frowned upon by the technocracy.
I've heard of a technocracy, but I haven't been told much about them. Only that they are not that they're an enemy of sorts.
How did it go back? Let's see. Let me give this short version. Okay, so back in, well, I suppose you would call it the Middle Ages. Some people call it the Mythic Age, the time when mortals believed, accepted magic, and the arts were not necessarily entirely open, but more open than they are now. And the world was plagued with with monsters, because they also existed back then. And so the forces came together and formed what they called the Order of Reason, a group of pious men of science. Back then, science and religion did not oppose each other, and formed this new order to bring their crusade against the monsters, the beasts of the night, and against the wizards. That would be us. And they brought new powers which we had not seen before, things like cannon. And so the Great Ascension War began. And it did not go in our favour, and as a response, we eventually founded the Council of Nine Traditions, band together to hope we could weather the storm. Centuries passed. The Order of Reason, this will be back in the Victorian period, they reformed themselves into something called the technocracy or technocratic union. Do you know what the word technocracy means in normal sense?
Yes, I'm aware that a society should or industry should be controlled by those most educated on the particular matters at hand.
Yeah. So
It should
yes,
be ran by the experts, as it were.
yes. Sorry, you cut out there. Yes, yeah, ruled by technocratic elite, and they pulled themselves into that. And I don't know they would argue that they have made a nice, safe world for people, for sleepers, for the masses, where they can go about their lives without fear of wizards and ghosts and monsters. Um, that's what they would argue. Some would say, however, that people's lives these days are stuck in menial jobs, almost literally have their life drained out of them, with their eyes closed and kept in the dark, unable to experience rapture or beauty. And they're quite adamant at trying to wipe us out because we don't fit into their defined scientific paradigm. That's not to say that every single conflict or encounter with them is a conflict. You might think of it more like a Cold War at times, that sometimes it flashes up and turns hot. But sometimes we do our own thing. Sometimes we may even cooperate against a greater enemy. You've probably heard all sorts of nonsensical sleeper conspiracy theories, terms like New World Order. Um, that would be a convention.
Yeah.
That would be a convention, a tradition of the technocracy. Um, you know, they doubtless have control over the governments. They can have control over the global banks. They have great influence over the masses. They have people awakened like us who are capable of acts of genius. I think they would see it as. But they will also, if you face them, they would likely also have people who are not awakened but armed with their technology, what we would call wonders, items able to work magic on their own in their own right.
See, interesting. So wonders are effectively enchanted items of magical significance.
Enchanted through their advanced enlightened science. Has this been? Sorry, I'm assuming this has already been explained to you about the idea of how belief can shape the way the world works.
To an extent, yes,
Okay.
I'm aware.
There's an okay. There's a. I think the best analogy I can think of here would be, just to digress slightly. Sorry if this is already be covered for you, but I think it's important to be clear on this. So, when the Order of Reason first attacked us with their cannon, a lot because they should not work. But eventually, they had enough enlightened, genius people. They put enough criticisms behind it, and it started to work once now and again. And then people started to believe in them, and gradually, eventually, canon became accepted and refined and standardized. And then mundanes could use canon as well. I believe it's essentially the same today, except now rather than cannon, they use plasma guns. But currently, not yet anyway, the sleepers accept them as possible, but perhaps in the near future they will. Hmm.
Sam, yes, I believe on our first meeting, D'Onofrio did make me aware of why we don't exactly practice magic out in the open, other than the stereotypical witch burnings. In that it becomes much harder to apply and use.
I will.
She did teach me. She did give me a brief lesson on the nature of paradox and how it affects us.
Yes, our will is enough to change the world, but it has to contend with the will of millions.
Yes,
And
I
it's
believe she said something almost exactly the same.
well, where do you think I heard it? Mm.
I just need to be a beer real quick. I'll be right back.
So
Nope, not all again.
Oh, yeah.
I'm back.
Okay. So, for my part, my own background is more with forces and mind. So, forces are rather impressed upon me by the offering. Mine, I think, is my own predisposition. Mundanely, I work as a lawyer, and I'm also known to practice Hermetic law. The order has a long established legal system. It goes back to its founding, based on the oath, which gets complicated because now we also have tradition law as well. Have you met the other Hermetics of the Chantry?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Let me see. There was Solon. No, beg pardon. There was Stephanos of House Vitius, but I think he's left now. He got called away. You may see Rory around. Young fellow, blonde, ginger hair. He's House Meronita, the house besotted with all things fairy. He's not a bad fellow, but he is essentially a teenager, so he's a bit short-tempered, and will moan about how unfair life is. Of course, we mentioned Onofrian already, and Master Croshaw of House Bonasagas, the notional head of the Chantry. There was also Hyung, I think that's how he says his name. Who's a odd fellow. I think he's joined House Vitius. He came to us quite late. He's actually a cyborg. I think from some technocratic construction probably that let escape them.
Sorry, who was this gentleman again?
Hyun. I think that's how he says his name. I don't know him well. I haven't seen him around. Yeah, he's quite heavily cybernetic, at least on the inside. So there's Yun, Rory, and I think Minnie just arrived from America. Again, I've only met her once. Yeah, do say hello to Rory if you get the chance. Say if you could stand his short temper. He's actually, he's not violent. He's just gonna say act like a teenager. Frankly, if you can get past that, he's actually quite a nice fellow. He's been around a lot and he's done a lot.
Well, I'll see if I can catch up with all of them.
I would have liked to get to know him better, but unfortunately, my first encounter with him was when I was asked to prosecute him, which is rather, of course, impeded my ability to have appropriate discourse with him.
Oh, was this Rory?
Yes.
Yes, that is quite a way to meet someone.
I'll say, to be honest with you, I quite like the fellow, but last I heard, the case may not happen in any way. They may plea bargain it out of the way. He was I think he'd done some things which, shall we say, had poor judgment. We'll leave it at that. But he'd also been noted around for singing some rather offensive songs, which had annoyed a lot of people. Which, while not a crime, had annoyed a lot of people.
Oh my, yes. That is. I would consider that unwise. Certainly not productive in any capacity.
Oh
dear.
Hmm. How much have you heard about the history of the order? Since evidently you are a historian, I would have thought that's a topic of interest for you.
The Order of Hermes, I suppose that I have been looking into it. Of course, I'm not quite as educated as I am on more
No.
mundane,
Mm.
institutions.
No. The order was, well, originally it was never a secret organization. It was more of an obscure organization, like, shall we say, the more minor, obscure monastic orders of the Middle Ages. Our founder, I believe, if I remember correctly, goes back to 787 AD in its current form. And how can I put this? The difficulty at the time was that different ages, the different traditions, could not peacefully talk to each other because if they met, there was too much risk of a surprise attack, and there was no robust way to defend against that. Our founder, known as by the name Bonasagus, found a way to create a, a a robust form of magical defense, a palmer. It was called a shield, and that meant for the first time, wizards could actually meet with each other and converse. And he decided that rather than keep this to himself, he would find others, he would teach them this palmer, this shield technique, if they would agree to join his order and swear his oath. And eventually he and his apprentice gathered a group of 12, and they became the founders. And they founded a major house. And he also, what that let him do was he brought together all these different magical traditions across Europe, and he found a way to integrate them into a shared magical system, the Bonasagus system of magic. And for the first time, that meant they could easily cross train and share their knowledge. Some would say that his word was literally that palmer shield. He started by creating a shield in a literal sense. He then went on to create an organization to shield mages from the world, or indeed for the mages to act as a shield for the world. And well, the centuries passed, and there was conflicts and wars back and forth, and some houses fell and other houses arose. There's a long and storied history, which I won't bore you with now. And then we come to, as I say, the 15th century, towards the end of it, and the order had been suffering under this order of reason. And once again, people went out. They found mages from across the world, because the world, of course, had got far bigger than the European mind imagined. And once again, formed a council of 9 traditions to bring them all together to stand as one. And but a little before that, our order had developed this new system of magic, the sphere system of magic, which is what you're being taught, which is now how we use our arts, which is more powerful, more flexible, and again more amenable to cross training. And then here we are, 500 years later, still with the order as one tradition among a council of 9, and all the other crafts which haven't joined the council, and still fighting that Ascension War. So I hope that gives you a little hint as to the context. There were, yes, I think that this might be a. Give me a moment. So, I mean, I hope that helps you understand why that we're not really one tradition. We've brought together the magic of the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Celts, and others, and integrate that into a shared magical system. There we are. Right. Yes, if you look at, you pulls the book down, flicks through it, and shows you opens it up and shows you a picture. Hopefully that link will work.
Hey, I got it.
So that is a. You might be aware of how the Catholic Church depicts its saints. They're not literal representations; they're symbolic representations with artifacts that denote who they are and what they did. This is something very similar. This is how we depict the 12 founders. Bonasagus sits at the head of the circle with his white robes and books of knowledge. On the left is my own founder, Flambeau. The fire wizard. The symbol of my house is the hourglass, a reminder that everything eventually decays and dies. You see, he carries the hourglass, and he wears clerical robes denoting his religious faith. He was a very devout Christian. Do you have any questions about the others depicted there?
Well, I have a lot. I'm not sure where to really begin, to be honest.
Well,
I note that one of them is far different from the others.
Which one?
The largely naked woman.
Oh, Siamon. One of the founding houses. A very strange house. I think they had a base in maybe the Alps, the Pyrenees. The Siamon seek. I'm not sure what the answer to the riddle. They might say, or they had a lot of very strange beliefs. Some might say them a religious cult, except perhaps they didn't really believe in God in quite the same way that we understand it. Modern mages sometimes speak of ascension, of rising to a higher level of understanding beyond this sphere. We also speak of sometimes a quiet. If one is overwhelmed by paradox, one can fall into a madness of one's own making until one resolves the mental paradoxes. There is an old word in our order called twilight. It can mean quiet, but it can possibly also mean ascension, or possibly
What was that?
twilight, as in the hour between night and day. So possibly it means quiet in the modern sense of a madness brought on by magic. Possibly it means ascension in the sense of a rising to a new state of being. The Kriamon actively sought to study and understand and pursue twilight. They would puzzle over strange riddles and enigmas. They would gain these strange blue tattoos. I can't say fully understand it. It was a strange and mystery cult. Some of the ideas I think almost seem more Buddhist, more Asian, which had no business being in Europe in the Middle Ages. It's very strange. I think whereas some would fear that kind of condition of twilight, they actively sought it. They thought it would unlock all the answers to all the mysteries and eventually ascend. They saw ascend into twilight as being liberated from the chains of this world. A bit like the Buddhists talk of what's the term? Escaping the cycle of reincarnation. Perhaps those ideas would be a reference point. I can't say I fully understand it. The Queer Mall are not a major house currently. I don't know if any of them are still around. There might be a few in the House X Miscellaneous somewhere. I think there was an old quote about yes, whereas most would fear twilight because they see it as the dusk of our lives when our lives come to an end, functionally. They see it as dawn.
That is interesting.
No,
I was just curious because it just stood out very in fairly strong contrast to the rest of the figures.
Yes, they were always very weird, strange house.
I see an axe, an ankh, and an apple.
Yes,
on the 3 snakeheads.
Well, perhaps you can answer your question there. What do you think those denote?
Well, I assume the apple is representative of the apple of Eden, or the apple of knowledge.
Yes. And I assume with your Egyptian background, you know what the ankh represents.
Well, the ankh represents life.
Yes. That's not actually an axe. It's a symbol you might recognize from the days of classical Rome, or sadly for the days of fascist Italy.
Oh, yes. I actually have him make a roll for it because he does have very high academics.
I think you can assume
he probably would know.
I think you can just assume it. I mean, I know from school before we hear about Mussolini. That's the axe with the bundle of rods is a symbol of power and authority. I believe it was carried in front of people as a bit like a scepter or a ceremonial sword. You note also the symbolism of the bundle of rods. That one rod alone can be broken, but bound as a bundle, they're unbreakable. So it's you might say it's power through cooperation.
Yes. I think I understand it a little bit better now.
I mean, you can also see that those 3 symbols denote 3 cultures from which we draw. We're drawing the culture of ancient Rome. We're drawing the ancient magic that predates that of Egypt, and we're drawing the Judeo-Christian mysteries, the magic of the Kabbalah of the Jews, and of the Christian mystics and the Christian faith.
Interesting. He'll actually take out his phone. Actually, no, you won't. Yeah, you will, actually. And you'll just take a brief picture of the little symbol of the 12. I think I'll print that off later and add it as
Yeah.
an addendum to my
If
my
you're gonna,
notes.
if you're gonna do huge icy things with that, check with the storyteller, because
Yeah. All I'm doing is adding it
it's fine.
to a file called Theodus Crane's Mage Journal.
Um,
Welcome to Beckett's Jihad Diary, just made by a shitty mage.
um, some might also comment on the symbolism there. You'll note there's 12 of them. And well, what else do you think that there are 12 of?
Ah, yes. We are suckers for symbolism, it seems.
Well, yes, not
A lot going on in one image.
not just the 12 disciples, also the 12 sides of the zodiac. You could, as a what would be the term? As a purely academic exercise, it's sometimes fun to try to figure out the correspondences. Which of these would map to which disciple, or which of these would map to which zodiac sign, or potentially which would map to the elements. How are you so far with humor theory?
Humor theory?
Okay. As you may know, there's the four classic elements: earth, air, fire, water. But they also
yes. I believe I know what you're referring to. The
which back to the four humors of blood, yellow bile, black bile,
yes
phlegm.
the medical system that Hippocrates developed.
Yes, was still in use for until the Renaissance at least. But those elements also can exist in different states, whether they're dry or wet, or whether they're warm or moist, and so on. So that can produce a series of 12 categories, which again gives us our 12. But I mean, I say use until then. If you're familiar with modern psychology, still uses it. Frankly, they just use slightly different names for it, for the personality types. And at least it would still say in English, you might describe someone as phlegmatic or sanguine. Yes. For example, Jung tells us that of 4 different basic functions: sensation, intuition, thinking, and feeling, that could relate to the 4 elements. Well, correspondences that can be drawn. And with some of these, there can be points of conflict. There can be different ways of mapping and finding the correspondences. For example, the 4 elements map to the 4 ritual symbols used in the tarot deck, from which our playing cards come from. So there's the suit of swords, of wands, of cups, and of coins or pentacles. They map to the 4 elements, but scholars will argue over which maps to which. I would hold that swords are the element of air, the symbol of reason and of the higher thinking. But there are some who argue that they should become under fire, because they want to stress the destructive aspects of a sword. So, well, you find
and there are, and once again, fitting in with the symbology, there are 12 major arcanas of the tarot deck, if I recall. I know there's more minor.
I believe there's 21 in the major arcana. And the minor arcana is like a modern playing cards, except they have an additional picture card. They have the
yes, no, you're right. It is. Yes, it is 22, not 12.
Yeah, I say 21 because there's a card 0. So
yes, the full,
yes.
which is either which makes up 22, but obviously begins
yes.
at nil.
Yes, and if you've ever looked at the Jewish system of the Kabbalah, the Kabbalah have, I believe, in the Tree of Life consists of 10 spheres or Sephiroth connected by lines. There just happened to be the 22 lines. And it was only in the 19th century that Epictetus Levi suddenly figured out that maybe you could correspond those 22 lines of the Tree of Life to 22 lines of the major arcana, thereby uniting two completely disparate systems, mystical systems, which had existed for centuries or thousands of years in the case of the Kabbalah.
I'm surprised it took them that long.
Well, they're two radically different cultures, and also I think different social classes. You know what the learned Jewish Kabbalists in the synagogues were doing, and perhaps a few Christians who studied their mysteries, was very different to, shall we say, the traveller community playing with tarot cards.
This is very true. These would be two cultures that would rarely interact on an intimate level.
That was only, I think, when the tarot cards started to become more fashionable among the upper classes. That it just goes to show you that there are still correspondences and links and mysteries and parallels to be unlocked, and it makes you wonder that if different cultures have developed these systems that have these parallels, does that tell us that these are innate somehow in the world or in our minds, or are hard coded into the creation? I mean, scientists would speak of the cosmological constant, and rules and laws set down when the universe was started. For us, is this not the same? These mysteries were set down at the start of creation, and they are there for us to be discovered.
It does make one, yes, it does make one wonder what else is out there.
Yes, I mean the 22 of major arcana that starts with the Fool, and then who knows nothing but sets up the road happy and curious. It's like the Hobbit leaving the Shire, would be, I suppose, a modern take on that. And then the first thing he meets is the magician. Are you familiar with tarot cards?
Awesome.
Good. It's a good background to the game. Was that reference book from the shelves? So this will be the magician from the famous Wider Right deck developed by Aleister Crowley or his circle of friends. You'll see the magician. In this case, he's wearing the classical Roman robes, and he has with him the four suits, the 4 ritual items: the sword, the wand, the cup, and the pentacle. Reach up to claim power, and with a halo of infinity. But beyond that, think of the 22 cards of the major arcana in their numerical sequence. So, as I say, we start with the Fool, the Magician, and so on. Now, just now, keeping that in mind, think about, lays out a page in the book that it's showing. Now, think about some popular stories. I mean, if you do Lord of the Rings, if you want, or perhaps any big popular Hollywood movie. Think about the structure of that story. Now, compare it with that numerical sequence. So the main protagonist which might be Frodo, that might be Neo, or that might be Luke Skywalker, sets out on his path as the fool, happy, carefree, and ignorant to the world. He meets a magician, an old and wise man with magical powers who helps and advises him, be it Gandalf or Obi-Wan, and so on and so on and so on. And later on in the story, he reaches the point of death, where he symbolically dies and is reborn. And towards the end, achieves the final judgment, where he blows up the Death Star and returns to the wider world. Can you see the pattern?
Well, yes, it not only corresponds to the tarot deck, obviously it's also part of the monomyth.
Ah, you're familiar with the monomyth. Yes. Now, of course, some of those films were, of course, deliberately written to follow the monomyth. Tolkien wasn't aware of it, as far as we know, so a lot of it wasn't intentional. But he just knew all the old stories to draw upon. And yes, and my own little humble breakthrough is my suggestion that actually the tarot deck is also following the monomyth.
Well, I'm aware some scholars have gone as far to say as even religious figures such as the Buddha, Moses, and Christ in particular are also depict narratives of the monomyth.
Oh, certainly they are. But makes you wonder, were their lives actually following the monomyth, or is that just because we frame their lives that way and the stories have grown to fit the myth? And again, is
one of those chicken or egg situations?
Both may be true in their own way, but then that makes us wonder about our own lives. Should we live our lives, or try to live our lives, in accordance with some monomyth, or indeed, even if we don't try, will it happen anyway? And that, or in someone else's monomyth, which of these cards will we play? Is it the wise magician mentor to advise them on their journey, or is it something else?
Well, I am currently number 0.
And that can be valuable to know where you are on your journey. Well, does that make me the magician then?
Well, you're suddenly further along than I am. Wherever you are.
I had the benefit of being taken in by the order at a young age. So, you've said you've been learning your first spell, to put it that way. How do you see your magic as working? I mean, what do you actually do? Tell me about the spell you've worked. What would you do to enact it?
Well, for this particular spell, it depends on whether I want to do it from a distance. I suppose it depends on whether it corresponds to electricity or flame. Obviously, I cannot interact physically with flame without harming myself. With When it comes to flame in particular, I simply speak several words of command in various different languages. I find that Sanskrit and Sumerian are actually remarkably effective.
Oh,
As for electricity, I often use symbols of command instead. I find symbols to be more reliable, but a bit more overt, obviously, as I have to physically input the symbol onto the device in order to get it to stop.
mm.
But I can, in theory, use words of command on electrical light as well. It's just that I find symbols in particular more effective. I haven't attempted to use both methods in tandem with each other, but it is something I'll be embarking on to see if I can make it more effective, increase the reliability of my own spell once I begin to discover what is most effective and optimal for me. As I know what my fundamentals are. I know what I need to do. It's just a matter of what out of all of my options, of all that I have, of all that I currently know and have learned so far, is the best path of going about my workings.
Mm. Hmm. When you say symbols, do you draw them? Do you brandish them? Do you...
Yes, I have them. I have them. I actually have them written in both my journal and in a few notepads.
Well,
It's I simply press it up against the device.
mm. Ah, I see.
Drawing it, I did consider whether or not I should draw it onto the device, but I figured well, simply that would leave a trail, and I find that this method works and it is more subtle, so I stick with that one. But I have no doubt that if I could rework the spell to have
Mm.
to use it like almost like a ward that triggers immediately in a way.
Ah, yes.
I put the ward on something that triggers it, then the ward triggers. I could treat it like that, but that would require me to rework the spell for it to work in that way.
Mm.
Um, it is somewhat diverse. I have two methodologies that currently work,
That's good.
but that third one is sufficiently distanced that I'd probably need to
Mm.
come up with a new mechanism. Um,
Yes. Well, you. I mean,
Maybe if I were to if I could see it working if I used, for example, something like Paint, drew the symbol onto the notepad, then pressed it against the electrical device, then there is a link between the symbol's prior existence on the notepad where it is active.
I mean, if you leave a
And then
trail, it bothers you. You could find tracing it with your finger and visualizing that you're drawing it without actually drawing it with ink,
that might work.
or you could draw it with water or with anointed oil, for example. When a monarch is anointed, they use oil to draw to mark their forehead. Um, I mean, the use of symbols as wards. If you are studying the arts of correspondence and time, I suspect this will be a useful instrument for you to develop. Um, yeah, that when you start trying to create wards in the literal sense, then yes, that I would think so. I can certainly relate to use of words of power, words of command. I tend to prefer Hermetic Latin myself. Um, there is also certain traditions in order of using hand gestures. Um, let me Again, reaches for a book, flips through it. If you have a look at this page, these are some basic hand gestures. You'll see that it's designed to be done two-handed. So one hand describes what you're doing, and one hand describes what you're affecting. You'll note they all have meanings expressed in Latin.
Oh, I see.
So, for example, if one hand I would make the gesture in the top left, creo, I create, and with the other hand I would make the gesture ignem, fire, to conjure fire.
I see. A fairly straightforward principle to master. I'll look into it.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. I must say, I have the great benefit of knowing enough languages that I can.
You could probably, I'm sure,
tailor the words I used. Tailor the words I used to the situation. For example, I've been considering if I were to the hypothetical scenario in which I needed to affect, for example, a Spanish individual with a spell, I would speak in Spanish, for example, rather than English, because there is a much deeper connection to that language and that individual's identity than say perhaps their secondary language in English, if they possess English as a secondary language.
I see. So their own belief in and understanding then strengthens what you do. That makes sense.
Something they're inherently more comfortable with, or identify more heavily with, as identity seems to be a major principle in spell work. Finding a way to link to someone's identity, I can imagine only empowers the spell.
You've obviously mastered enough to be able to affect forces. You've spoken of, was it fire and electricity? Have you learnt yet how to set up a defensive shield with forces?
I am currently learning that.
Yeah.
Not a shield, less a shield, more than a sort of
a deflection shield.
Yeah, sort of. Yes.
Vulgar mages would like to call it the slipstream effect.
Yes, I believe that was what it was referred to as to me.
Yes. Well. Okay. Well, if you already
effectively, yeah. Oh, sorry.
If you already worked on that, that's good. So I was going to, if you want, I would suggest and help you along with it.
I'd be more than happy for the assistance. If there's anything I can offer you in return, although I doubt there's much right now, unfortunately, other than my knowledge in linguistics, is perhaps the one niche I can offer anybody.
I'm sure will be useful sooner or later. But calm down. I mean, if you're Denoffi's apprentice, she trained me, so I consider it simply passing forward what she's passed to me.
I'd be very grateful either way.
Well, I mean, I can. That said, I could give you access to my own notes on the spell, but it might do you good for your own education to develop it as a classroom exercise.
I very much understand that. Makes sense.
On a more practical level, you didn't mention any talent with the mind sphere. Do you currently have? Is your mind currently shielded?
No.
Okay. if you're going to be interacting with other mages in the city, I would strongly recommend we get someone to put a mind shield up on you. It's considered to be frankly standard around here.
Okay. Well, I could attempt to set one up myself ritualistically.
Oh, if you're able to, do you have
Hmm.
you have
Oh, see what
you,
level?
you need mind one to do it yourself?
Oh yeah, I can do it myself.
You can. Okay. Um, okay. Well, I mean, if you can't, I can do it for you. I'll need a few days to recover from the last trip if I do. But if you ever do it yourself, that would be good. And yes, take your time, do it as a ritual, and get it done. I I could I could probably find the time to supervise and assist if that would be of benefit to you.
I'd appreciate it immensely, and it would certainly be my first instance of taking part in a multi-person magical effect. It'd be something of a learning experience for me in that capacity.
Or we can use one of the communal sanctums here at the Chantry, and we just need to make sure that we've got sufficient sufficient practices and instruments and such like in common. Do you have any? How do I put this? Do you have any deeper philosophical opinions yet as to what magic is and where it comes from and why it works?
My current working theory, particularly based around the existence of the other traditions, is that magic does not come from one definitive source, but actually comes from several.
Okay.
Based in ancient cultures of the past, hence why the languages of these cultures tend to have a greater effect than those of more modern cultures. But I personally, my personal hypothesis, I'd rather call it a hypothesis than a theory. I'm using the word theory very incorrectly here, very abusively. I'd go so far as to say, is that it is likely that many of these cultures developed magic separately from each other.
That's certainly true.
But the truth of the matter lies within these ancient cultures. The simple truth is that from everything I have heard and witnessed, magic was far stronger in the past than it is now, or at least could be used more openly.
That
would be perhaps more accurate.
Truth. Whether that's because simply that's the way the world was in the past, or whether that's because of people's belief was different, or the world, or because there were less people in the world, reality was more valuable.
My current hypothesis is that it is the culture of these ancient nations shaped the world in such a way that funneled the development of magic in a way that is stronger when channeled through these ancient cultures, because they were the origin points, as it were. But of course were developed separately from each other, or perhaps not. It's something I believe, but we've been discussing symbolism here and all these disparate connections, so it is possible they come from one origin point from even further back in the past.
Well,
which is something I want to learn about if possible.
We could wonder if there was a common origin point, or perhaps these are simply principles hard coded into creation. which they have has been independently discovered.
I believe
You've
so. I
not.
perceive magic as a fundamental energy that is being tapped in several different through several different methods, but it's the same common energy being used to shape the world, channeled through very, as I said, separate means, separate cultures. But it was the fact that it was originally shaped through these cultures that has made magic what it is. It is less the origin point and more how it has developed, which interests me most.
Suppose I was to put to you the Crowley definition that magic is the act of bringing about change in accordance with one's will.
Oh, very much so. That is definitely something I believe.
Now, the criticism of that definition is every deliberate conscious act is magic. If you go into the next room and make a cup of tea, that's an act of magic.
That is very true. Very valid criticism.
Do you have a response to that criticism? Or is it that simply that you would agree with it? That it is a flawed definition for that reason?
I would say it is. I do not believe I believe if we had the perfect definition, then there perhaps wouldn't be the 9 traditions or the technocracy or any of the disparate factions, because we'd all have the definitive truth. But I believe addressing that criticism would come down to what it would be defining the difference. I'm trying to find a way to word it. I do apologize.
That's kind of right.
But he actually starts giving us some proper thought.
Well, perhaps you should take that one away and reflect on it. Perhaps there is no good answer, or perhaps you should simply deny the criticism as a criticism and simply say that yes, that's correct. Every conscious act that changes the world is a feat of magic.
Defining the difference between a common baseline that is possible for all and that is not me wording it correctly. Okay. Effectively, the difference between the mundane and the supernatural. I would not state that I believe that pouring a cup of tea to be magic, because that does not require a sufficient exertion of will for it to be so.
That is a good argument. It does predispose there is a distinction between the mundane and the magical. And on that basis is actually circular logic. You say you make the assumption.
Precisely, it's about establishing that
there is, because you defined it that way.
Yeah.
You are right to correct yourself about all. Not everyone is able to walk into the next room and make a cup of tea, sadly.
Yeah, for example, I can't. Most people are able to run, but I'm not. So that, for me, would actually be would be something quite magical if I could begin running the next, let's say, tomorrow, because that was not possible for me in the past due to a well-established medical condition. But it would certainly be magical to me because that was not possible for me before and was well established to be impossible for me in the past and in the present.
Like many of these things, it can come down to interpretation of words. As Crowley said, the act of bringing about change in accordance with one's will. The trick here is that Crowley did not mean will in the everyday sense of what I casually want right now. He meant will in the sense of one's higher purpose, one's higher will, one's destiny, if you believe in destiny.
I believe that actually touches on some Eastern elements,
Um,
the higher soul and the lower soul.
Indeed, it's not entirely clear exactly what he means unless you get deep into his writings, and a lot of his later stuff is not helpful. The drugs watched his book.
No, Crowley wasn't
But
a very straightforward man.
But do you see the point there? I presented to you a definition which we could have a good debate over, even though we were both, when having that debate, completely misinterpreting a key word from what the author intended. The debate.
The other issue, I believe, is the risk of slipping into solipsism, as
True, but
obviously we're trying to establish a fundamental, but
my point is
that is a very tricky thing to do.
But my point is, the debate was valid and interesting and useful in its own right, even though the instruments we used in that debate, the frame of reference, was wrong. The power of the debate came from us having the debate as two intelligent gentlemen, rather than from the instrument of the debate. And I think really I've given you far more enough lecturing for one day. Is there anything else that you wanted to ask me while I'm here, or that I can be of assistance with?
You've taught me a great deal. Frankly, I wouldn't ask any more of you. But if you happen to be around later during the day or in the coming days, I'll be more than happy to aid you in working that mind shield.
Well, I'll be happy. I propose actually do it the other way around. If you're able to cast it, I propose I'll aid you. I think it's probably better for your instruction that you do it yourself. My own mind shield is already done. And as I said, I'm a little fatigued for my last expedition to be leading a ritual. And well,
fair enough.
You have my details if you need to contact me. And yes, I'm sure we'll get a time booked in, and I'll see you in the communal sanctums.
I shall see you soon then. Have a pleasant day. It was good to meet you. Fine, I know we met before.
No need to plan the ceremony. Rupert will do 5. Thank you, players, for playing. Thank you, watchers, for watching. This has been another episode of Darkness in Dublin, or Hermetic Nerds Talk Nerdery.